Majulo has returned with Chapter 18 after what's felt like months, and I could not be more ecstatic. See, outside of the fact that absence makes the heart fonder, absence in the midst of two absolutely peak JJK fights makes the heart, well, a lot more than fonder. See, this manga wanted to take a couple of weeks off. I would have appreciated if they did that, I don't know, around when they were fighting tigers. But no, currently both Rika and Mahoraga have been reintroduced into the fold, and we're getting some of the highest level fights we've ever seen, not only in Majulo, but also in the entirety of the JJK universe. And this chapter, Chapter 18 of Majulo, solidified that fact. See, not only because in this chapter we get a better understanding what's going on with Yuta and Rika, and how the cursed tool that is Rika's ring has gotten stronger over the years, but also, even though we've seen Mahoraga in 3 separate high-level fights, we're finally in Mahoraga's 4th and probably final fight, getting to see what true adaptation looks like. All the while, Dauda is continuing his campaign of using this battle against Mahoraga to once and for all establish that Sukuna wouldn't have stood a chance, as a light speed movement is right around the corner. All that is to say, while Chapter 18 is a whole lot more punching than talking, won't hear me complaining about that fact. So without further ado, let's get directly into Chapter 18 of Majulo Explain. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video every single week, you guys can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the 4th wall link in my description below. Jiraiya's finally getting Naruto to master the summoning jutsu. So, Chapter 18 picks up exactly where Chapter 17 left off. And if some of you don't remember where Chapter 17 left off, I can't really hold that against you. It was literally weeks ago. Basically, in Chapter 17, when Yuka got fed up with trying to fight against Maru the fair and square way, Yuta, from the now canonical within the JJK universe Heaven, called down to Rika, who still has presence on Earth on account of the fact that she is a vengeful tide spirit tied to the cursed tool that Yuka wears around his neck, which is Yuta's ring, and was like, hey, can you make sure my grandson doesn't die? To which Rika obliged, even though Yuka reminds her of Maki, who Rika is highly jealous of. And after Yuka said that he accepts to Rika's power, she unveiled some new kind of mech equip on Yuka that allows for the two of them to work together, unlike how Yuta and Rika work together, as Yuta and Rika kind of operated as separate entities. And while Yuta was able to tap into the ridiculous amount of cursed energy that Rika had as the queen of cursed spirits to do things like keep himself alive long after he should have died from fatal injuries, or super amp his cursed techniques, it appears as though Yuka, who's taken after Maki more than Yuta, Tsurugi. That's how long it's been since I talked about It's Tsurugi. Yuka is Tsurugi's sister. She's dead, floating in shadows right now. I gotta be better. I'm relatively sure I have COVID, and I'm very tired, and also it has been weeks since I talked about this manga. Anyways, because Tsurugi is more like Maki than Yuta, Tsurugi's essentially wearing Rika as an equip, tapping into not only his heavenly restriction power, but also her multitude of cursed energy to truly amp the physical capabilities of their combined forces to the max. And thus now it's a beat-down, drag-out fight between Maru and Tsurugi Rika. What was the name we agreed on? Sarika? Sarika. Sarika's better. And thus, that's how Chapter 18 opened, as Maru is staring at Sarika, while the narrator tells us that the ring around Tsurugi's neck is a cursed tool that's been passed down through the GOJO clan. A cursed tool that stayed on Yuta's finger his entire life, that drew a connection to Rika, and that ring is currently allowing for Tsurugi to tap into the power of Rika. The fight then kicks back off as Maru uses his chaos and order technique to swap Sarika's perception of gravity, spinning it. Her, them, he, all of them, technically. Anyways, Sarika's getting tumble-dried by Maru, and seemingly the spinning of gravity also affects all of the things around Sarika, like the building that they were on, and thus the abandoned building behind Sarika is turned into rubble. Rubble, however, that Sarika disappears in, but not for long, as they pull a page out of Sukuna's book and bounce off all of the large pieces of rubble to Maru's location in the air, grabbing stones as they go. Sarika then flies in with a fistful of stones that she smashes into Maru's arm as he tries to block his face, all the while Rika laughing aloud, talking about how being spun by Maru is like a roller coaster. However, Tsurugi, who doesn't want Rika talking without permission, chastises her and says, I told you not to talk. But clearly Rika isn't listening, as she goes on to say that she hates amusement parks because they're filled with brats. And like, this raises the logical question, did Rika ever age? Like, is Rika a 5-year-old forever, or is she like 100 ish now. Anyways, Maru, now reeling from having these stones smash into the side of him, thinks about how it's absurd that Tsurugi now has access to this ridiculous amount of cursed energy, while blood trickles down his face. However, as he looks at Sarika, he comes to the realization that the source of its power comes from the cursed tool in the center of its stomach. And he reels at this realization as he thinks about how Tsurugi told him it was a keepsake from their grandfather. But he goes on to think that there's no way that this cursed tool could hold on to this much cursed energy. There's an unimaginable amount of energy pouring out. And thus somebody with an unimaginable amount of cursed energy must have been pouring a ridiculous amount of cursed energy into this object for decades. And it's at this point that I'd like to remind all of you how Yuta used his cursed techniques. See, there's a reason that Yuta's domain expansion manifested as a bunch of katanas that had different cursed techniques. See, Yuta has more cursed energy than Gojo. Probably the most cursed energy out of anybody we've ever seen, minus Sukuna. However, initially he wasn't good at turning this cursed energy into cursed techniques. And thus Gojo taught him to pour his cursed energy into objects, which is why he always uses his katana, because it's something easy to pour cursed energy into. And therefore, essentially what we're being told here is that for the decades after Sukuna's defeat, Yuta was most likely pouring whatever excess cursed energy he had into Rika's ring. And therefore, Rika's ring now lives as a testament of a lifetime lived from one of the most powerful sorcerers in human history. So while yes, obviously Rika is the queen of curses, and therefore manifesting her ability in any way whatsoever would give Tsurugi a massive power-up, what also is essentially being stated here is that Tsurugi is tapping into a lifetime of power from his grandfather. That is to say, this is the most possibly amped version of Tsurugi we could ever see. Now, the battle between the two of them continues as Maru tries to use his third eye energy blast to blow Sarika away, but Sarika, also taking a page out of Sukuna's book, pushes through the force, grabs Maru by the chest, and headbutts him. Then cocks a massive right uppercut, lands it into Maru's chest, and sends him flying. But Maru's either able to survive this or just simply block it as he lands on a piece of floating debris. And Sarika comes in to join him as they say, "Sorry, Maru, but I'm going to do anything that I can to win." But it's in this moment we pan to Maru's foot and we see that for some reason flowers and plants are beginning to grow around it. As Maru tells Sarika, "No need to apologize. The same goes for us." And as he says this, a deep forest undergrowth begins to grow around him. Now, a couple of things could be happening. Obviously, what could be happening here could be an offshoot of Maru's technique, which allows for him to essentially make whatever the least logical conclusion would be at this moment in time come to pass. On this floating piece of debris in the sky, hundreds of feet above the ground, it would be completely illogical if a bunch of plant life suddenly grew. Hypothetically, because this hasn't been confirmed yet, his technique controls entropy, and thus entropy would dictate that this piece of debris is going to fall back to the earth and shatter into a million little pieces. However, hypothetically, Maru's control of entropic forces would allow for him to keep this piece of debris in the air and cover it in plant life. Maybe. However, the possibly more likely thing that's happening here right now is that all of this plant life is growing around Maru because of how much positive energy he's putting out. Over the course of the end of chapter 17 and this, the beginning of chapter 18, Maru's taken a fair bit of damage. And while it hasn't necessarily been confirmed that any of the Sumerians know how to use reverse curse technique or whatever they would call it, considering the fact that the releasing of positive energy not only heals your wounds, and seemingly Maru's wounds have been healed, but also the releasing and usage of positive energy is incredibly useful in battles against cursed spirits, and Rika is a cursed spirit. It would seem to hint towards the fact that, kind of like with Mahoraga's Sword of Extermination, Maru's going to start using positive energy to take down the incredible cursed energy of Rika. But apparently enough about that fight, because after Maru grows a whole forest, we cut back to the two shirtless ripped guys destroying entire cities, as Mahoraga is absolutely aura farming on Dabra. And like, man, does this page just truly display how great the paneling ability of this new artist is. Mahoraga's in the center, standing on some kind of pillar as a silhouette with his giant wing eyes being portrayed, and Dabra and Mahoraga are put in the white space of the sky, and as Dabra thinks to himself that the atmosphere has changed, he strikes Mahoraga with a flurry of light attacks that cut through Mahoraga's silhouette. It's masterful paneling. But on the next page, even though we see these light streaks go through Mahoraga, he's not horrifically gored like he was previously in this fight. While yes, he is initially stunned, Mahoraga immediately afterwards snaps his arms through all of the light. And thus it becomes abundantly clear that Mahoraga has done what Mahoraga does best, and adapted. Mahoraga then flies down to Dabura's level and tries to get behind him, but Dabura is still faster, as he once again tries to use the move that he used on him a couple of chapters ago, as he plants his feet and arms on Mahoraga's face, and launches a cone of light through Mahoraga's head. But this time, instead of eviscerating the vast majority of Mahoraga's body, Mahoraga is left unmarred. And it's this point that Dabura, with a shocked expression on his face, realizes that things are about to get ugly, as he thinks to himself that it have no effect, as he tries to push away from Mahoraga, but Mahoraga slashes at him with his sword of extermination, barely missing a fatal blow on Dabura, but leaving a scratch on his face. And it's this moment that Dabura realizes exactly what's happening with Mahoraga, that his technique is being nullified, that Mahoraga consumed his technique, synchronized with it, and after one rotation of that 8-handled wheel that Mahoraga is named after, the adaptation was completed. And while in a daze as Dabura tries to block the oncoming attacks from Mahoraga, he thinks to himself, do I have no moves left? Am I gonna die? Is this it? And it's in this moment that he thinks back to a time when he was all the way back on Samaria as a much younger Diskunte tribesman, walking around with his best friend, Dura, who's berating Dabura for not getting along better with his clansmen. But this makes Dabura sad, as he asks Dura, what, do you not want me here? But Dabura lets him know, no, that's not what I meant at all. In fact, I'm grateful that you're here. To put it bluntly, outside of you, there is literally nobody on this planet worth fighting. Which speaks to the kind of ridiculous power of Dura that was unfortunately just kind of snuffed out on account of the fact that he had to fight the one person stronger than him. But Dura continues on by saying, well, even if you were with your tribesmen, being isolated amongst them, that would be kind of tough, right? I mean, you have your role as a traveler. Apparently, Dabura had a role amongst the Diskunte, where he was allowed to travel the planet, most likely because of something they talk about immediately after this, because Dabura picks up his part of the conversation by saying that the Diskunte tribesmen have a lot of pride, and that if he, Dabura, mixes amongst those tribesmen warrior, they unfortunately get their pride hurt. And thus his mere presence amongst the tribe that he's supposed to lead one day leads to a lot of problems. It makes people uncomfortable. And thus that's the reason that Dabura is a traveler, and the reason that he's spending time with Dura. We then flash back to the present as we see that Dabura has been launched into a building, and as he sits amongst the rubble, he thinks, you're amazing, Dura. I'm about to lose. I'm terrified. We then flash back to the conversation between Dabura and Dura, as Dabura lets Dura know, even when he does fight with his clansmen, he ends up winning without putting any effort in. And in that moment, he feels as though he's being rejected by his own clan. He understands that his clan cannot accept his existence because he makes them feel weak, and that makes his chest sting. Dabura continues on by saying that he is a warrior, and that he's strong, but he hates fighting. But Dura just laughs at him and says, no. Not it. It's not that you don't want to fight. It's that you've never fought in the first place. The Dabura I know is too strong to be a warrior. But this doesn't pierce into Dabura's skull, as he simply lets Dura know, I don't get it. And Dura, with a smile on his face, just simply chuckles and says, well, there's only so much words can convey. However, someday, somehow, somebody will appear that's strong enough to take you, Dabura, on. And when that person appears, you'll understand. We then cut back to Mahoraga, who's doing his best adult Gon impression on Dabura and punting him like a penalty kick. I don't know, a goalie kick. That's probably better. However, as Dabura is being absolutely pieced up by Mahoraga, he thinks to himself while he's being blasted through entire city blocks, I see. Fighting because you want to fight, and not fighting because you don't want to fight. That's not battle. And at this point, the Dabura thinks about what Dura had to go through in order to protect the people of the Luma tribe when Dura was asked if he would be willing to protect the Luma tribesmen by entering into combat against Dabura. He also then thinks back to who I assume is his sister, who's telling him that he should be able to do it. I'm assuming that is defeat Dura, but fan translations are kind of rough. It could also just be like a combination of his sister and Dura telling him that he should be able to find the will to engage in true, genuine combat to protect the Luma tribe, because in the next page, we see the Luma tribesmen all looking at Dabura, smiling, and it's as Dabura thinks about all of the Luma tribesmen that he's fighting to protect right now, he extends his right fist, catching Mahoraga's right fist and shattering the sword of extermination that's tied to it. And it's at this moment that Dabura thinks to himself, fighting to protect other people, fighting because you have no other choice. That is what battle is. The one who can do that is a warrior. And while Dabura is having this realization, Mahoraga yanks its arm away and creates some distance, while Dabura apologizes to it, saying, hey, sorry about that. I'll fight properly now. And it's at this point that the narrator lets us know that Dabura's technique blank word and light can either be used as a projectile or on his own body. However, on account of the fact that Dabura's body wasn't able to move at the speed of light, that is to say, it would be destroyed, Dabura's never tried to move his body at the speed of light before. However, Dabura thinks to himself as he stomps his feet into the ground, is if the light part of my technique is being nullified by Mahoraga, what I can do is beat it to death. My bare hands. And thus Dabura strikes a fighting pose as he says aloud, "Hey Dura, I'll become a warrior." The narrator then closes out the chapter by saying, unexplored by humanity, Dabura will become the one who dances at sublight speed. And wow, what a chapter! Well, nothing has really progressed in terms of plot in the fight between Maru and Tsurugi. It seems as though Mahoraga's fourth and final loss is all but guaranteed. Once Mahoraga's opponent starts doing a character arc, that's pretty much wraps for the Opstoppa, tying to the fact that Dabura is now going to be moving at relativistic speeds, making him by far and away the fastest combatant we've ever seen in JJK, mind you. I don't really think there's anything that Mahoraga is going to be able to do, considering the fact that Mahoraga and Dabura were evenly matched in speed before Dabura started accelerating himself at close to the speed of light. However, who's to say that Mahoraga hasn't previously adapted to blunt force attacks? On top of this means that Mahoraga's probably gonna have to be eviscerated by like one big All Might-esque punch. And that's kind of hard to do. I mean, if you're moving at the speed of light, it's not that hard to do, and that's probably what's gonna happen. But it looks like now that Mahoraga's sword is gone and light attacks are out, all of these fights are gonna boil down to taijutsu and choreography, and I personally could not be more excited about that fact. If there's one new gen universe that does hand-to-hand as well as Naruto did, it's JJK. And so, even though we had to wait a couple of weeks, boy oh boy, was it worth it. But do you guys agree? How'd you feel about chapter 18? Was it perfect? Were there things you would have liked to add? Let me know in the comments below. Well, I guess you're down there, please. For me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Excuse me, there's some mullet downstairs that needs consuming.